He stood motionless in the shadow of the palace, the air thick with dust and dread. The blade gleamed under the Persian sun, its edge whispering promises of pain. And yet Sisamnes did not run. Once a judge cloaked in the weight of justice, he now faced a verdict. Not from any court, but from a king. Cambyses, the ruler he had served and betrayed, had ordered his skin stripped from his body while he still drew breath. The man who once upheld the law was now its victim, destined to become a grotesque monument to its power. This was no simple execution. This was a ritual designed to carve fear into the soul of an empire. Imagine the courtyard stone baked by the unrelenting sun soldiers, standing like statues, their faces carved from stone themselves. The executioner, shrouded in black, held his blade with care, like an artist preparing a canvas. Sisamnes was bound, wrists tied to posts, his chest exposed to the world. The first cut was shallow, a delicate line across his shoulder. Blood welled slowly like ink, seeping from a quill. He did not scream, not yet. The crowd watched in silence. Some turned away, unable to bear the sight, while others stood transfixed as if the act held them captive. Cambyses observed from a throne of cedar and gold, his eyes cold, his lips curled in satisfaction. This was not pure justice. This was power cloaked in righteousness and terror. The air was heavy, not just with heat, but with the weight of what was unfolding. Sisamnes had been no ordinary man. His robes once commanded respect, his verdicts shaped lives across the vast Persian Empire. From Susa to Sardis, his name was spoken with reverence and awe. His judgments were as unyielding as mountains. Yet here he stood stripped of dignity, awaiting a fate so horrific it defied comprehension. The flaying was not merely punishment, it was spectacle, a message etched in flesh for every judge who dared to bend the law. How had it come? To this, how does a man entrusted with justice become the canvas for such a brutal lesson? To understand the death of Sisamnes, we must first understand Cambyses, the king who was never meant to forgive. Born in the shadow of his father Shiraz the Great, he burned with ambition. His father had built an empire that stretched from the Nile to the Indus, held by loyalty, conquest, and order. Cambyses inherited this legacy, but not its ease. His throne was young, his rule unsteady, his heart restless with the need to prove himself. He was fire, contained in human form. His gaze fell heavily on those who served him. Sisamnes, older and wiser, had been a pillar of this empire, a judge whose role was to embody the law. In those early days, he was more than a magistrate, he was balance in chaos. His court was a stage where truth and power met, and he played his part with precision. They called him the man who could silence a room with a glance, whose rulings were as final as the grave. Merchants trusted his fairness. Nobles feared his impartiality. Even kings listened. But power, like slow poison, seeps into the heart. Sisamnes, for all his wisdom, was not immune. A whispered offer, a bag of gold, a promise of favor. These were the seeds that took root. At first, the changes were subtle, a dispute settled for a price, justice compromised. A noble's crime overlooked for wealth. The scales of justice began to tip, and the people noticed. Whispers grew into murmurs, murmurs into accusations. Cambyses, ever watchful, heard them all. A corrupt judge wasn't just a failure. It was a crack in the foundation of his empire wrought beneath marble. The king didn't act rashly, but his patience was a blade honed and waiting. Sisamnes felt the shift before he saw it. The court grew colder, the king's glances sharper. Trusted allies grew distant. One morning, a case was removed without explanation. A scribe stopped delivering his daily reports. Suspicion thickened. Sisamnes knew the ground was crumbling. What had he done to earn this fate? Why would a king turn on a man who had served him? To answer that, we must step back to a time when Sisamnes was not Betrayal's name, but Promise's child rising in grace. Sisamnes was not born to bleed. He was born to judge. In a modest Persian province far from Persepolis, a boy grew among scrolls, silence, and ambition. His father, a minor official, taught him the power of law, how it bound men stronger than chains. Sisamnes absorbed every word. He was no ordinary child. His eyes held quiet intensity, as if he saw not just the world, but the threads that held it together. Neighbors whispered he was touched by fate, a boy born to wield not swords, but verdicts. They were not wrong. He grew like a blade. Sisamnes devoured texts on law, philosophy, and governance. His intellect outpaced his years. When he reached manhood, he was sent to the capital. In the courts of Cyrus, the great Sisamnes became a rising star. His voice could calm a dispute or condemn a criminal with effortless command. Senators deferred to him. Scribes scrambled to record his words. They called him the man who made justice feel like poetry. His rulings carried the weight of divine decree. He wasn't just respected, he was revered. But reverence is fragile. The higher he climbed, the more shadows he saw. He saw power's underbelly, bribes offered in shadows, favors traded like coin, loyalty bought and sold. At first he resisted, his integrity a shield. His court was a beacon of order in a vast unruly empire. Commoners trusted him, nobles bowed. But temptation is patient. A single case changed everything. A wealthy landowner, a disputed estate, a discreet offer of gold. Sisamnes hesitated, then accepted. The ruling was minor, the injustice small. No one noticed. But the door had opened. More offers followed, each easier to take. He told himself it was practical gold for his family, power for his court. He was not a villain. Not yet. His ruling still held wisdom. His court still commanded respect. But slowly, gold outweighed law. The man who once saw the threads of fate began weaving his own downfall. The empire was vast, but not so vast that whispers couldn't reach the throne. Then came Cambyses, young, barely past boyhood, ascending after his father's death. Sisamnes saw opportunity, a chance to guide an untested ruler. He offered counsel, polished and precise. Cambyses leaned on him, relying on his experience. Sisamnes was appointed to oversee justice in the empire's heart. He felt secure again. Cambyses was no ordinary king. Beneath regal bearing burned fire, ambition, suspicion, hunger for control. He watched the court like a hawk, noting every glance, every whisper. Sisamnes, confident in his stature, grew careless. The bribes continued. The rulings tilted. The murmurs grew louder, carried by merchants and nobles alike. A merchant cheated of land spoke too openly. A noble slighted sent word to the palace. Cambyses listened, his face unreadable, his mind already turning to judgment. Sisamnes sensed the change too late. The king's summons became rare, his tone colder. Court allies faltered, their loyalty fading fast. Sisamnes tried to reclaim his honor. He ruled more fairly, spoke with conviction. But the stain of corruption clung like damp rot. He was no longer the judge who silenced rooms with a glance. He was a marked man, a liability, in an empire where weakness invited ruin. Cambyses' patience was a veil over storm. Sisamnes believed himself indispensable, a pillar of the court. But Cambyses saw cracked pillars as things to be toppled. The judge had thought he was upholding justice. He did not realize the empire was already preparing to carve its lesson into him. Cambyses was no longer the boy who sought advice. He was a king who saw himself as a god. And gods don't tolerate flaws. His ambition was sharpened by conquest, his paranoia fed by empire. Egypt had fallen, but victory only deepened his distrust. Sisamnes became a shadow, a man whose corruption now threatened the myth of an infallible king. The change was subtle. Cambyses grew distant. Audiences with Sisamnes were short-laced with accusation. The judge tried to earn favor again. His rulings were careful, his words measured. But the king's gaze was unrelenting, cold. Cambyses began testing him, assigning impossible cases, disputes between nobles, trials without clear justice. Sisamnes navigated them with skill, but the victories felt hollow. The court, once his domain, had become a trap. Its walls were closing in. He wrote to allies, few replied. He spoke of loyalty, none believed. Even his own voice rang false. The empire's machinery turned against him. Scribes omitted his name. Officials avoided his presence. He was not yet condemned, but isolated, a man on a ledge with no path back. He began to dream of blades of blood on stone, waking in fear. Then came the first blow. No warning. One morning, two closest allies officials who had dined at his table were executed. No trial. Just their bodies in the market square. Blood on marble. The message was clear. Cambyses was purging weakness. Sisamnes was next. He stared at his walls in dread. He was not a judge anymore. He was a target. The bribes, the tilted rulings, the gold beneath his floorboards were chains now. He tried to fight back. Not with weapons, but with words. He drafted a letter pledging loyalty. He invoked Cyrus the law, the years he had served. But the king was unmoved. Cambyses saw not service but betrayal, not a servant but a flaw. Sisamnes spoke in court with passion, but the faces were masks. They watched in silence. He was alone. His voice echoed in halls where once it ruled. Nothing reached the throne anymore. The summons came at dusk, not to a public court but to a private chamber. Lit by torches, Cambyses sat alone, fingers tracing the armrest of his throne. "You have sold what was mine to guard," he said. "The law is not yours to barter." His voice was calm. Sisamnes tried to speak, to beg, but the king's gaze silenced him. The sentence came, "Your skin will adorn the seat of justice, so that no man after you forgets its weight." No chains followed, just the heavy knowledge that his fate was sealed. The blade was already waiting. He returned home. The city's sounds faded. The king's words pressed against him heavier than any robe. He sat in his study, staring at scrolls that had once defined his life, now meaningless. He thought of his son, Otans. Would he inherit this curse? Would he understand this horror? Would he see the chair draped in his father's skin and understand Sisamnes knew the end was near, not with clashing swords, but with a blade quietly sharpened? The day arrived like a storm long promised. A messenger came at dawn. No guards, just silence. The king had spoken. Sisamnes would not be dragged. He would walk to his death. The flaying would be public, a spectacle, a lesson. Sisamnes rose. Each step rehearsed a lifetime of choices. He bathed, the water cool, one final time. He dressed in plain robes, no longer a judge, just a man awaiting judgment. The courtyard was ready. Stone walls loomed. The sun burned above. Soldiers lined the edges, their spears glinting. The executioner waited. Tools laid out with care, blades, hooks, a table. Sisamnes was bound, wrists tied to posts, his chest bare. He met Cambyses' eyes and saw no mercy, only resolve. This was not punishment. This was a message: defy me, and this is your fate. Sisamnes did not speak. He nodded once. Acceptance. Then turned his gaze to the horizon. The first cut came, shallow, precise. Across his shoulder, blood welled steady. He clenched his jaw. No scream came. The executioner worked slowly. Each strip of flesh was deliberate, a testament to the king's will. The crowd gasped. Some wept. Others froze. Sisamnes trembled, but his eyes stayed fixed on something beyond pain. Memories flickered. His childhood, the scrolls, the courtroom. Otans watching from the crowd, pale, unyielding. Sisamnes wanted to speak, to tell his son live, be better, but his voice was gone. The pain consumed him, yet he held still, refusing to scream. His skin was peeled away, piece by piece, until he was no longer man, but symbol. When it ended, he slumped, ruined. The executioner stepped back. Silence fell. Cambyses rose. His voice rang out. Let his skin be stretched and tanned and draped over the judge's chair. Let his son Otans take his place and sit upon it. The crowd dispersed. Whispers carried the tale across the empire. A warning. The chair, now a relic of horror, was placed in the court. Otans took his father's seat. His hands trembled. His father's shadow eternal. The empire did not rejoice. The people whispered. Fear outweighed outrage. Cambyses had made his point: justice would not be mocked. But his victory was hollow. The chair cast a shadow. Judges ruled with fear, not fairness. Verdicts shaped by blood's memory. Sisamnes' death didn't end corruption, it changed its shape. Fear replaced greed. Justice, once a light, became a ghost. A specter watching from a chair stitched with pain. A warning in every courtroom. His story endured. Scribes recorded it, their quills trembling, describing the blade, the blood, the chair. Poets wove it into verses heavy with sorrow. Philosophers pondered its meaning. Sisamnes was not just a man, he became a symbol. A relic of truth older than empire's power demands obedience. Betrayal brings ruin. But it wasn't just about punishment, it was about cost. The price of wielding judgment in a world where kings act as gods. Sisamnes faltered, but so did Cambyses. His justice was as brutal as the corruption he sought to destroy. A mirror cracked on both sides, unforgiving. Otans carried that legacy. In silence, he ruled. His verdicts fair but restrained, his eyes always glancing at the chair beneath him. Some called him wiser, others haunted. He never spoke of it, but his rulings carried weight as if each one pleaded for redemption, for the man, for the empire. The empire moved on, its wheels grinding forward, but the chair remained, a silent witness in the court, a reminder that justice is not a gift, it is a burden, and those who carry it risk being crushed. The weight of law, once noble, now clung like skin on wood. Across centuries, Sesamni's name endured, not for life, but for death. His story whispered in Greek courts, etched in Roman scrolls carried by travelers to distant lands. A parable, a cautionary tale for judges. A reminder justice is not only wisdom, it is fear, and the blade never sleeps. Cambyses too became shadow, his name spoken with cruelty. His empire fell, his conquests faded, but the image of the flayed judge remained, a wound in history, never healed. His story outlived thrones. The chair became legend, a ghost at every judgment seat, whispering warnings to those who dared rule. We stand now at the edge of this tale, looking back at a man who was both villain and victim, a judge who betrayed his oath and paid the price. His skin stretched across that chair speaks across centuries, a relic of flame, beautiful, merciless. Justice, it whispers, burns. In courts of kings where power and truth collide, someone always pays. Sesamnes did. His echo lingers, not in books but in dread, in the silence before a verdict, in the weight behind a gavel, a voice in the dark saying, choose wisely, for the blade is never far. Long after Cambyses faded, the story remained, retold in quiet halls, judged anew with each retelling. Was Sesamnes a monster or a man consumed by empire's rot? Was Cambyses a tyrant or a ruler protecting law's sanctity? The answers shift, but the chair stays still. Skin does not forget. The people of Persia never spoke his name the same way again. To some he was a warning, to others a martyr, but none forgot him. Even centuries later, under different kings, scribes inked his tale with trembling hands. Not out of respect, but out of fear it might return. The chair sat in silence, yet never slept. It shaped rulings, curved spines, bent voices. Otanes sat taller with each passing year, not with pride, but with burden. His back stiff with memory, his lips silent, but eyes screaming. His father beneath him always there. The skin never stopped whispering. Judges who followed never dared to forget. Some touched the seat before passing judgment. Some could not look. The younger ones cried their first day. The elders offered no comfort. They all knew to rule is to carry flame in your hands and burn, just as Sesamnes once did. The law continued, reshaped by kings, wars, empires. But the lesson endured, carved not in marble, but in flesh. Sesamnes was a man, a father, a judge, a name spoken not with honor, but with weight. A reminder that every choice under the crown comes with blood in its shadow. And so the flayed judge walked into legend. His name not lost, but stained. His story not erased, but etched. A tale too brutal to forget, too powerful to silence. And now you've heard it too. Not just with your mind, but your spine. Because deep down, you know the blade waits. The throne room changed after the execution. Cambyses laughed louder, feasted harder, but loyalty shrank. Advisors spoke less. Courtiers kept their eyes low. Even soldiers once proud stepped back. The king had carved his justice into a man, but trust cannot be commanded with blood. Silence became his companion. In the weeks after, the flaying whispers traveled faster than caravans. From Persepolis to distant provinces, the tale bloomed in shadows. Not all spoke with scorn. Some mourned the man Sesamnes had been before gold weighed heavier than law, before fear ruled the court, before justice became a corpse. In markets, they retold it like myth, the judge who sat too high and fell too far. In taverns, drunk men mimicked his screamless silence. But in homes, fathers warned sons, power may lift you, but it also watches. And if the king must teach, he'll use your bones as chalk. Sesamnes had once dreamed of legacy scrolls, respect and wisdom passed down. Instead, his legacy was skin and shadow. The weight of judgment turned against him. He became a lesson carved in agony. Yet some still asked, had the empire lost more than it had gained? Justice bought with fear. Was it justice? Otan's aged quickly. The weight of the chair aged him more than time. He spoke less, judged carefully. He never smiled. But his verdicts were clean, not perfect, but honest. And each one in its silence seemed to ask forgiveness, not from the court, but from the ghost beneath his seat. Otain's aged quickly. The weight of the chair aged him more than time. He spoke less, judged carefully. He never smiled. But his verdicts were clean, not perfect, but honest. And each one in its silence seemed to ask forgiveness, not from the court, but from the ghost beneath his seat. Children born in the years after knew the chair before they knew their laws. They'd hear tales of the skin that covered it. Some said it moaned at night, others that it warmed when justice failed. None touched it, not even the janitors. Even kings avoided it when they could. The skin faded over time, but the shape of the fear remained. New judges arrived believing themselves untouched by the tale until they sat and the weight pressed down. The story was older than their pride. The seat was older than their ambition. It swallowed arrogance whole and smiled. Artists painted the execution in secret. One canvas showed Sisamnes with arms stretched, pain in his eyes, and the king watching calm. Another showed Otanes seated back straight, haunted. These paintings weren't celebrated. They were hidden, too powerful, too dangerous. Truth, after all, can wound more than any sword. Even centuries later, when the empire fractured, the chair was preserved. It moved from court to court, sometimes hidden, sometimes displayed, but always respected, always feared. No ruler dared destroy it. They knew symbols don't die, and reminders of justice's cost are the only things that keep kings awake. In a forgotten archive, a philosopher once wrote, "It is not the man we remember, but what he became." Flesh became fable. Law became lament. He ended with a warning, "If justice requires blood to breathe, then beware its hunger. For today's blade may one day remember your name." Otanes never brought his son into the court. He refused to let the next generation see the chair as normal. At home, he taught quietly fairness over favor, truth before comfort. He never mentioned his father, but in his silence the lesson thundered: some legacies are better left buried deep. As years passed, Otans's rulings earned respect, not from fear but from clarity. He judged as if each word might be his last. People noticed. They began to whisper a new tale, that justice had returned, not through triumph, but through restraint. A man fighting not corruption, but the ghost of it. Yet even in dignity, Otans remained alone. The court never embraced him. He bore the curse of legacy. He could not be trusted fully nor dismissed. He was tolerated, a symbol of what had been lost and what might still be reclaimed. His hands signed law but trembled when touching paper. In private, Otanes visited the chair. He'd light a lamp and sit quietly. No verdicts, no scribes, just breath and memory. Some say he wept there, though none saw. Others say he spoke to his father, whispering into the wood. No one knows what answers, if any, the skin gave back. Eventually, Cambyses fell. His mind unraveled. Conquest turned to chaos. Rebellions rose. Advisors vanished. He died not as a god, but as a warning. The empire buried him without glory. No throne, no honor. But the chair remained, unmoved, untouched, watching. The judgment he gave out had finally judged him too. And so ends the tale of a judge who became skin a king, who became fear, and a chair that became legend. In every courtroom where justice teeters, in every eye that fears the gavel, his story waits. Not to condemn, but to remind power burns. And justice remembers who scorched it.